Hi, everybody. I'm Jake Lubinsky. I'm a clinical research manager. I think it's technically manager, clinical research in the Department of Emergency Medicine. I work specifically in the Resuscitation Research Center. I've been here for going on 10 years now. And today I'm going to talk about EFIC or EFIC or EFIC, exception from informed consent for emergency research. So I don't have any financial disclosures, but I do want to disclose that I am not an IRB member, ethicist, employee, or direct representative of the CTSI, a spokesperson for MCW, an attorney, or as my wife would like to tell me, I am not many other things either. I am, however, somebody who's worked with EFIC for the past 10 years that I've been working with the RRC. I think we've had about 7 or 8 exception from informed consent projects in my time here. I'm saying those things, pointing that out because EFIC in particular is kind of a gray area. There's regulations for it, but every institution and body is going to have a different interpretation of those regulations. And so some of this is my own opinion. I don't want to represent other people when I'm talking about it. So today I'm going to try to go through the why, what, and how of EFIC, and hopefully leave some time for any questions and discussion at the end. So why EFIC? To answer that, we kind of need to talk a little bit about the history of emergency medicine. And if you don't know already, and this was kind of a shock to me, emergency medicine is very young. So it started back in the 1950s and 60s. The US public began to really recognize the need for, and they also demanded better emergency care. That photo on the left is from right around 1955. And it's still kind of said sometimes today, but back then, usually emergency medicine and emergency care was all in the same room. So it was the emergency room or the ER. In 1966, the National Academy of Sciences came up with this report called Accidental Death and Disability, the Neglected Disease of Modern Society. This was really the birth of modern EMS, think like paramedics, ambulance systems, stuff like that in the US. And then they also called for better care of emergency conditions at the hospital level. Decade or so later, hard work, the American Board of Medical Specialties finally approved emergency medicine as a specialty. And then for about 30 years after that, EM and EMS continued to grow and innovate. But they also started to recognize that there were some unique challenges in this clinical setting to studying and improving care. So what exactly was that unique challenge? I'm sure everybody on this call and in this room is intimately familiar with the Nuremberg Code, Declaration of Helsinki, Belmont Report, and Common Rule. The point that I would really want to make of all those four is that they form the basis of our ethical understanding of protecting the rights and safety of human subjects. And central to all of those is the concept of informed consent. But if you look to that picture on the right, is that setting really one that's conducive to conducting an informed consent process? I mean, imagine being a research coordinator and having to jump into that arena, stick your head between 6 physicians and try to conduct an informed consent process. I don't think that's really feasible. So, because the informed consent process is not feasible in many of these emergent conditions in emergency medicine, should we just accept the status quo and throw our hands up and say, yeah, good enough is good enough? I would argue no. That's my own personal opinion. Some people would argue differently, but fortunately for my own work, and we'll go into the what here, hopefully. Physicians, other caregivers lobbied Congress, and in 1996, codified into federal law was 21 CFR 50.24. This is a particularly short document and subsection of the Code of Federal Regulations, but it details, it's only about 2 pages long, but it details in specific exception from informed consent requirements for emergency research. The core requirements of 21 CFR 50.24 is that the condition under study has to be life-threatening, and the current and available treatments have to be unproven or unsatisfactory. Obtaining informed consent has to be impossible because of the patient's medical condition, 2, because the intervention has to be delivered before obtaining consent from an LAR is feasible, and there has to be no reasonable way to prospectively identify these individuals that could become eligible for participation. Next, the participation in the research has to have the potential for direct benefit. The investigation cannot be carried out practically without this waiver from informed consent. The investigational plan has to define the length of the therapeutic window, and the investigator or his or her designee has to commit to attempting to contact an LAR within that therapeutic window. The IRB has to approve an informed consent process, and at any time that it is actually feasible, we have to try to consent an LAR. But they also have to approve procedures and information to be used when providing an opportunity for an LAR or family to object to a subject's participation. So an example of this would be in many of our cardiac arrest studies in the Resuscitation Research Center, they're involving EMS providers in the out-of-hospital setting. We create a verbal script for them, and that verbal script has to be read whenever there's an LAR or family member there, giving them the opportunity to say, no, I don't want my loved one being part of this study. Additional protections, and I'll kind of go into more detail on these in a bit. The investigator has to conduct a community consultation. They have to conduct both pre-investigation public disclosure and post-investigation public disclosure. There has to be an establishment of a data safety monitoring board. And at the time of CPR, we have to summarize any efforts made to contact subjects LAR or family members to provide an opportunity to object to participation, but also any attempts to consent. And we have to make that information known to the IRB at the time of continuing review. That's typically in sort of a spreadsheet format. So I mentioned that 21 CFR 50.24 is very short. It's also, I'm going to argue, very vague. And like all good laws, it's not particularly straightforward and a little bit confusing. So the FDA decided they're going to create this guidance document for IRBs, investigators, sponsors, et cetera, around 21 CFR 50.24. This document is much longer. It's about 65 pages long. But it goes into much more depth and detail than the actual codified federal law. So one of the sections that I'd highlight in that guidance is community consultation. The goals for community consultation, and I tried to underline things that really highlight what they're doing, but you want to inform the community about the study in advance. You want to give the community an opportunity to provide input to the IRB. You know, they don't talk to the IRB. You do, but their voice can be heard by the IRB through these community consultation events. You want to show respect for the community by allowing representatives to identify any community level concerns and effects that the research could pose on that community. And then you want to show respect for the subject's autonomy by including activities where individuals who either have suffered these emergent conditions or might be at risk for these conditions are involved in those activities. That on the right is me attending a community consultation event. It was a pre-organized event, not specifically for us. We set up a booth, handed out brochures, talked to people about the upcoming study, and then also asked them to complete a survey. One thing I'd want to point out about community consultation is that it's not community consent. So we're not going out into the community and asking folks to say, yes, our community absolutely will participate in this. We're asking for their opinion about the study, and then we're presenting that to the IRB to inform them of whether there's support in the community for conducting the study. Individuals still have their own autonomy. They get to make their own decision. So the community is not consenting on behalf of people. Example activities, you could attend a standing meeting. You could organize specific meetings in the community to discuss the research. You could go on local radio, television talk shows, create interactive websites, focus groups, and I think what we're doing most commonly is surveying people. All of these community consultation events have their own strengths and weaknesses. The FDA really recommends conducting a plethora of events. Moving on to initial public disclosure, the goal here is to give sufficient information to the community about the investigation, its risks, its expected benefits before initiation of the study. Often we're doing that through newspaper ads, but I'll go into some other examples. On the left is from one of our studies, a newspaper ad that we published. Other examples would be targeted mailings to particular individuals, advertisements in English or, if necessary or possible, a foreign language in those specific newspapers, links and information on the sponsors and participating sites, websites, public service announcements, talk shows, television programs, letters to local or regional leaders, and other presentations at meetings of community, local government, civic, or patient advocacy groups. Again, similar to, where did we go here? Similar to community consultation, the FDA recommends conducting multiple events of different types. That's how you reach the most people. End of study public disclosure, I want to highlight as well. This is following the investigation. The key points with end of study public disclosure is that the IRB has to document the information, and it typically needs to include demographic information to tell the community who was involved in the study, how many people were involved in the study, and give a summarized explanation of any findings from the study. On the left is another example from one of our recent studies where we conducted an end of study public disclosure. So how are we actually doing this in real practice? Not a graphics designer, and I definitely don't do flowcharts very well. So this is kind of complex, but on the left, I tried to highlight the steps that you would conduct before a clinical investigation. You'd want to initially submit your IRB protocol. When that's submitted, you're going to develop your community consultation and public disclosure plan, and you would submit both of those to the IRB for review. When they say, yeah, this is a good idea, you can actually go out into the community, conduct your community consultation. Once you conduct your community consultation, you want to submit all of those results to the IRB. Then they'll say, yeah, you can go ahead and conduct public disclosure. So at that point, you'd conduct all your public disclosure activities, submit those results again to the IRB, and finally get to initial IRB approval. During the clinical investigation, and this isn't necessarily in the regulations, but a lot of IRBs are requiring it, you'll want to conduct ongoing public disclosure. That's often things like a website that gets periodically updated. You could send out new mailings, publish new newspaper articles, stuff like that. I think the meat and potatoes of EFIC research is really the documentation and attempts to locate legally authorized representatives or family members during the actual study or during enrollments. You have to document really everything you possibly can, but you need to document attempts to locate LARs, to consent them to participation during the therapeutic window, attempts to notify LARs or family, and provide an opportunity to object before you enroll via exception from informed consent. If a subject expires after enrollment via EFIC, you have to notify still the family. It's typically in letter format. If the subject survives after enrollment and they become capable of understanding the study, you need to present the study to them and give them an opportunity to object to continued participation. And you really want to document any subject or LAR/family complaints throughout the study. Now you've enrolled everybody into your research project, done your data analysis, understand who was all involved. So after the clinical investigation, you need to develop an end of study public disclosure plan, submit that plan to the IRB, conduct your end of study public disclosure, submit those results to the IRB, and finally completed your study. Some notes and suggestions that I would make. One, and I didn't put it on here, and it's the most important one, but if you're going to participate in an exception from informed consent research study, read 21 CFR 50.24. It's 5 minutes, 2 pages. It's very quick, but it's something that you should really understand. I would also suggest, if you're going to start working on, a community consultation piece, I'd really read through the 2011 FDA guidance document, specifically that section, public disclosure, same thing. Another note would be that every IRB and their interpretation of these regulations and requirements is different. And especially in today's day and age, where many of these trials are going to be multi-center NIH funded, you're going to have to use a central IRB. You're dealing with 2 IRBs that have different interpretations of the regulations. So some of this might not be the same every single time. Some people might want you to conduct certain events, a certain number of events. Some people might want you to document stuff differently. It's going to be IRB dependent. During another note, during community consultation and public disclosure, you want to collect both quantitative and qualitative data. Many IRBs are going to want you to write up for each event that you attend or put on. They'll want kind of a summary of that event, who was all there, what was the tone of the event, who presented, stuff like that. But they also are going to want that survey data and specifically, demographic information to show that you're reaching a representative sample of the community in which you intend for this study to take place. When you're actually going to work on the project itself and enroll patients, you should have exception from informed consent standard operating procedures, meaning how many times am I going to search EFIC for a family member? How many times am I going to talk to the social worker to see if a legally authorized representative is on the way to the hospital? Stuff like that. When do I send a letter? All these things should kind of be hashed out before you actually begin the study, and then you want to stick to them as you're actually implementing the trial. And then the last tip I'd give, and I know this is common with all research, it's just document some more. It's especially important with EFIC because we are enrolling somebody without first providing informed consent. It's both, I think, the right thing to do, but it's also important for protecting yourself and your own work. So that is the end. I added on here some additional reading. It's got CFR 50.24 and also the FDA guidance document, along with some other things that were mentioned. And then a shameless plug, if anybody goes to conduct their first EFIC trial, I'm happy to collaborate and talk with anybody at any time about it. And if you are looking for collaboration in the emergency department, that's our Resuscitation Research Center profile with information about our team. So thank you all. Any questions, discussion, anything like that? Yeah, go for it.
So thank you. This is really great talk. What's your sense of what are they doing for community consultation these days? I remember the first often I did studies.
Yeah.
The first one it was but it was there was just a evening dinner at the Italian Community Center.
Mm-hmm.
And afterwards Tom just asked, so what do you think? And everybody's like, this is great, we should do it. And yeah. Tom was like, well, that didn't work because you want some
you do want some feedback, right?
And then they switched to kind of random digit dialing. Mm-hmm. That kind of went away because people don't answer their cell phones if they don't know the number. So and you just kind of going out into the community and doing events. And I should say, I mean for things like resuscitation research where with some of the epilepsy studies, you go out there and be like, oh, we'll go to an epilepsy support group. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. But resuscitation is what do you do? Go to McDonald's in the drive-thru and say, hey, I see you supersized your Big Mac. What do you think about resuscitation research?
Yeah, so for people online, I don't know if they probably can't hear people in the...
I don't think so. I dropped in the chat just so they
Okay.
knew that they won't be able to hear us. But yeah, if you want to repeat any of
just
that.
brief summary, I guess. It's kind of, the question is like, where is community consultation headed today? Like, what are folks expecting you to do? What kind of events are you supposed to conduct? My answer specifically about resuscitation research, like you said, you could go to epilepsy groups, and there are cardiac arrest survivor groups that we can reach out to, stuff like that. But typically what I would say is most people are not wanting you to do random digit dialing anymore. I think it's a little impersonal. So I kind of get that argument. There's also really good data that you get from it. So there's also that argument there. But what it really comes down to is that FDA guidance that is various events, conducting, a multitude of both getting the investigator into the community, talking to people, but also getting that survey data, that really quantitative data, presenting that as well. So does that answer?
Yeah, I was just curious because it seems like it's a moving target.
It definitely is. And every IRB that I've worked with, that they're all central IRBs now for these multi-center trials, they all have a different community consultation plan. So there's no like one thing set in stone, unfortunately.
So when you say the different IRBs,
yes,
if like the central IRB coming to you then and saying this is what we want you to do, or do you?
No, so it's typically there's like a coordinating center, right, for multi-center trials. They're submitting a centralized community consultation plan to the central IRB, and then they're typically giving that to the sites. And then they're saying, this is kind of what we expect. Here's a bunch of different options you can choose from. We need you to select this many options in this category, this many options in this category, and put this all together and then present it back to us.
And I do remember that a recent study that we were assisting with, that we actually reached out to quite a few different groups.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think the goal is to get people that would be affected or could be affected by the emergent condition, but also to get a sampling of the community that's representing the actual community in which it's going to take place, demographically, et cetera.
To get IRB approval for all those flyers and posters and surveys that you do beforehand?
Almost definitely, yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's a good point. Kind of forget which question we're on now. Do you have to get yeah, the question was, do you have to get IRB approval for all of the community consultation and public disclosure brochures, newspaper articles, et cetera, et cetera? And the answer is almost definitely yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, sorry, I forget.
No
Anyone online?
Hey, Jake, this is Tim from the IRB. Thanks for putting on this presentation. Great job. Excellent. I loved it. So just kind of tagging along with that first question regarding community consultation and kind of flipping that over more to public disclosure. Given that public disclosure, the idea is to, provide the general population with sufficient information about the trial that you're going to do, its risk, its benefits, and things like that. A good way to disseminate that information in the past has always been to utilize, newspapers and things like that. Given the variety of how people get their information these days, and all the different modalities that are available, have you, in your personal experience, have you found any benefit to utilizing other modalities, and have you gotten any better responses using other things like Facebook, Instagram, things like that?
That's an interesting question, Tim. I appreciate it. I would say that we have not used as much, at least in my personal experience, we have not used as much social media as I would like to have used in order to answer that question better. Also the challenging piece for answering that is that with public disclosure, we're not really getting a response from anybody. It's more like a newspaper is saying, yeah, we have this much reach, so your information has gone out to 200,000 people. And I guess in social media, what you could get there is you could get the views and the clicks and stuff like that. But I guess my answer is really that I don't know, because I don't really know how many people are actually seeing and responding to that public disclosure activity.
Yeah, I guess, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, okay, you can go ahead, Tim.
Oh, so I mean, have you heard about any other institutions doing anything differently?
Oh, yeah,
that they found have been working for them or anything like that?
Yeah, I do think a lot of places are using social media more than we have in the past. I think we've used the Office of Communications has tweeted for us before. And I don't really know the results of that, but a lot of folks or a lot of places are using more like interactive websites, stuff that directs to the national websites, things like that. But again, it's hard to judge because you don't really see the effect, I think.
Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you.
Are you helping with trauma and critical care has one or two studies in University of Alabama, Birmingham.
Okay.
Are you guys doing those?
I'm not personally.
I know that they have somehow Facebook and maybe some other social media. I can look into try to figure out how they used it.
Sure.
Because that's one of the things. It's like, well, I mean, you're not just going to post it because if you're supposed to get like the catchment area. You're going to get the world.
Sure.
I'd be curious to see how they do it in such a way that they reach the audience they want to reach.
Yeah. I don't know a good answer to that, but yeah.
There were just some comments in the chat, so I wanted to pull up.
Yeah, no, that's great.
There aren't any other questions.
Okay.
Does anybody have any other questions or comments?
Hi, this is Marcia Malloy.
Hi, Marcia.
Hi, I want to thank Jake for this presentation. Very right on point and helpful. And also, he was my mentor when I recently worked on the community consultation part of the Lights Pain project for the emergency department at MCW. So I wanted to speak to the fact that the Office of Communications at MCW is very helpful in helping us get the information out to the community through Facebook, through InfoScope, and also separately, the coordinating center for this about a dozen sites in Pittsburgh for this network, emergency network. They contracted with Qualtrics, and we provided them, and with IRB approval, of course, we provided them with the zip codes for the catchment area, and the catchment area is Milwaukee County. So Qualtrics sent out opportunities to respond to surveys through various different social media platforms, and that was very effective. We got, I think it was over 300, maybe 400 responses within about a month. And it was a good, we also sent the demographics of the catchment we were trying to reach, and it was very effective.
That's awesome. I guess that's a really good way to tie that all together then. Thank you so much for commenting that, Marcia. Anyone else? I don't know how to end this.
Yeah, nothing else in the chat. So.
Cool. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jake.
You know,